Coming up on Network Africa. French and U.S. hostages released in West Africa after years in captivity. Russia to provide free grain to Africa if Black Sea deal is not extended. Plus, police fired tear gas at Kenyan opposition leaders' convoy during protests in Nairobi. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Joke Rogers here in Lagos. We start off in Niger Republic, where French journalists Olivier Dubois and U.S. aid worker Jeffrey Woodke were both presented at a news conference in the capital Niamey after being held hostage for years by Islamist militants. Mr. Dubois was kidnapped in Mali in 2021, while Mr. Woodke was kidnapped in neighboring Niger Republic in 2016. Niger's Interior Minister Hamadou Souley told journalists that the two men had been held captive by a West Africa-based affiliate of Al-Qaeda. The circumstances of the two men's release is still unclear. Meanwhile, the White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby has held what he describes as the grueling team effort to secure the release of Jeffrey Woodke, a Christian humanitarian worker who is now safe and on his way home. The U.S. claims that there were no direct negotiations with the militant organization that held him and that no ransom was paid for his release.
I don't think there's been any. We were our team here at the NSC was involved in this. Of course, Mr. Karsten's special envoy for hostage affairs over the State Department was keenly involved. You saw that the president personally thanked the FBI hostage fusion cell for their work, as well as just the work across the interagency. As I said in my opening statement, the intelligence community, other diplomats as well. There was it was a team effort to get him out. There were no concessions made. There were no swaps here. This was just hard, grueling, deliberate work by diplomats and other experts directly with the government of Niger to get him home. And well, hopefully, I mean, he'll be home soon, but we're looking forward to that. I don't think there's been any direct communication by the president with respect to the family yet. I mean, we're just delighted. This news just broke, as you know. We're just delighted to be able to get him back in our hands. We're going to make sure he gets the care he needs, and I'm sure there'll be appropriate communications at the right time. But as I said in my opening statement, we also, this is, I mean, 6 years, and they just got word today. We need to give the family a little breathing space. And we extend our deepest appreciation to the Nigerian government for their help in securing his release. For more than 6 years, there has been a multi-pronged effort dedicated to locating and recovering Jeff, which was spearheaded by our military, our law enforcement, and our intelligence community working together with French support.
In other news, Russia has laid out conditions for agreeing to any further extension of the Black Sea grain deal, and President Vladimir Putin says Moscow could send free grain to African countries if those conditions are not met. The deal, allowing the safe export of grain from Ukrainian and Russian Black Sea ports, were renewed on Saturday for 60 days, half the intended period, after Moscow said any further extension beyond May 18th would hinge on the removal of some Western sanctions.
Guided by the needs, first of all, of African countries, Russia recently agreed to prolong for another 60 days the agreement concluded in Istanbul on the export of Ukrainian grain through the Black Sea and the unblocking of Russian agricultural exports and supplies of fertilizers. At the same time, we insist on the package nature of this deal, primarily in the interests of African and other developing countries, bearing in mind that they need large amounts of grain. 827 ships left Ukraine, of which only 3 million tons of grain was sent to Africa and 1.3 million to the poorest countries in Africa. Almost 45% went to well-fed European countries, despite the fact that this whole deal was presented under the pretext that we need to ensure the interests of African countries. If we nevertheless decide not to renew this deal after 60 days, then we are ready to deliver all the volume that was sent in the previous time to countries in Africa in need, from Russia to these countries, free of charge.
Leader of the opposition in Kenya, Raila Odinga, was tear-gassed yesterday while senior lawmakers in his parliamentary faction were arrested as protesters took to the streets to march against President William Ruto and the high cost of living. Reports say his convoy was repeatedly sprayed with tear gas amidst protests against harsh economic conditions in an attempt to prevent him and his supporters from driving towards the president's State House residence to deliver a petition. The convoy then sped through the streets of the capital to dodge police roadblocks before Mr. Odinga emerged from the sunroof to address a crowd. He called for protest every Monday until the cost of living comes down. At least 4 members of parliament were arrested during demonstrations in Nairobi, including the minority leaders of the National Assembly and Senate. Those protested include Kenyans who voted for President Ruto and feel he has not delivered on pledges to help the country's forgotten working class. Over in Mali, head of the country's junta, Colonel Assimi Goïta, is meeting with religious leaders, politicians and civil society as he seeks to promote the country's new draft constitution, which he expects will be disseminated widely and explained to the larger populace. The constitution is supposed to be the starting point of the vast reform project initiated by the transitional authorities in Mali for the return to civilian power. The referendum was previously scheduled to be held on March the 19th for its eventual adoption, but for almost 2 weeks, the authorities announced its postponement to a later date, arguing that there's a delay in the distribution of new biometric identity cards and that the national electoral body wasn't fully operational. Thousands of protesters marched through the streets of South Africa's cities on Monday to demand that President Cyril Ramaphosa resign as security forces guarded malls and roads to prevent a breakdown of law and order. The Economic Freedom Fighters Party, whose supporters are mainly poor and working-class black South Africans, claim they've suffered marginalization since the governing African National Congress ended white minority rule in 1994 and are calling for a national shutdown. South Africans are furious about failures of the governing African National Congress to deliver services and create jobs as a third of South Africans are out of work.
Protests are a dozen a day in South Africa. So how come this one called by the Economic Freedom Fighters is having the country on edge? Over 3,000 soldiers have been deployed across South Africa to work with the police, of course, in order to help maintain law and order. Government says this is to avert the situation experienced in July 2021, where riots and looting were recorded in several provinces in the country, and that left about 400 people dead. Earlier Monday, incidents were already recorded, but the National Joint Operations led by the Police Minister, Becky Cele, reassured people that everyone will be protected.
We hope that those that will be marching, as long as they do peacefully, we have no reason of interfering with them.
Many businesses took the precaution of keeping their doors shut. Security was tight at the OR Tambo International Airport, but flights took off and landed. In Alexandra Township, several groups of EFF T-shirt wearing protesters merged for a further protest march to the high-end area, Sandton, close by, as directed by the EFF second-in-command, Floyd Shivambu, before they ended at the electricity company, ESCOM.
We did not call a mass rally. We did not call a mass action. If we wanted to do that, we can call all the 1 million members of the EFF in one place. But our purposeful decision.
Now I'll be going over to Pretoria, where my colleague Innocent Samosa has been recording what's going on. Innocent, what do you have?
Greetings to you, Betty, and our viewers around the world. We are indeed coming to you from Pretoria, the capital city. I can tell you now that there has been many activities here in Pretoria, but a slow start to this particular shutdown. We understand that there are different political parties that were in support of this protest, or should I say shutdown, and some were not in support of it. And of course, I don't know whether or not this is a coincidence, but we came across the UDM also. They came here outside court to register their dissatisfaction. And right now, I'm joined by the president of UDM, Datu Baba Holumisa. Thank you so much for your time, sir. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Good to see you and also to be here.
Yes. You came here to register your dissatisfaction. Across the road is the EFF. Do you share the same sentiments? Is it one thing that you are fighting for?
One thing which is common between the two of us is that the common denominator is load shedding.
Hundreds of EFF protesters made their way to Pretoria's Church Square, demanding that President Cyril Ramaphosa step down. Some schools and businesses have been closed. However, public transport was not disrupted. After a long wait, the EFF leader, Julius Malema, eventually addressed the crowd.
Close all of this because the whole world must know there is shenanigans going on in this country. Our people stay in the shacks. Our people don't have water. Our people don't have electricity. This machine I'm running, none of them, none of their great-grandfather, grandfather, whatever in their family has ever done this. They will not do it themselves, and their children will never do it. I know, I've lived with them. They suffer from political jealousy.
There were also other non-EFF supporters of the protest.
Well, the protest is significant on many fronts, but in the first instance, it is indicative that the people of this country are surely starting to lose faith and trust in the judiciary, because the matters for which there is a protest today ordinarily could have been resolved by a course of action called mandamus, whereby a political party or a civil society organization could actually approach the courts to force the government, in this particular instance, to be able to provide the very services which, of course, are the source of today's protest action as well as the national shutdown.
And I'm happy that the message that comes from this national shutdown is that the Ramaphosa regime must go, that electricity must be returned to our people, that basic services must be delivered, running water, proper housing, proper education, all of which this government has failed to do.
According to the police, 87 people have been arrested and 24,300 tires confiscated from protesters. While the protest was mostly peaceful in some provinces, police has had to use rubber bullets and tear gas in places like KwaZulu-Natal and the Eastern Cape to bring about law and order. Across the country, the security agencies remain on high alert to curb any chaos that may erupt.
Welcome back to the program. We'll bring you news of more unrest, this time in Namibia, where activists have vowed to go on with protests against unemployment despite a police ban as the country marks 33 years of independence. Inspector General of Police Joseph Shikongo had directed the Namibian economic freedom fighters to choose another day to protest, saying holding protests on Independence Day may cause feelings of hostility. The NEFF activists, however, said they will go on with their demonstrations and accused the government of undermining their rights by deciding when they should or should not protest. The NEFF activist Michael Amoshelelo has called on unemployed youth to join the nationwide protest. He said unemployment in the country was now a national crisis. Last week, President Yegnob dismissed calls by some MPs to declare youth unemployment a national crisis, but agreed it was a serious problem that could push young people to terrorism for survival. The president said the government planned to create close to 3,000 new jobs in the police, prisons, and in the army in an attempt to address the unemployment issue. Elsewhere, Senegal's President Macky Sall has rejected claims that it would be unconstitutional for him to seek a controversial third mandate. The constitution in Senegal was amended in 2016 to shorten a presidential term from 7 to 5 years. It states that no one can serve more than 2 consecutive terms, which the opposition says clearly prevents President Sall from running in next year's election. Critics of Mr. Sall accuse his government of using the courts to sideline the opposition politician Ousmane Sonko. Mr. Sonko is currently facing 2 court cases that could threaten his eligibility for election. 12 out of 15 soldiers have been found guilty for raping minors in the Democratic Republic of Congo. This followed several weeks of hearings in the courts. In a court in Kamanyola, 1 soldier was discharged dishonorably for raping a 14-year-old girl.
In a makeshift courtroom in the eastern Congolese village of Kamanyola, a colonel whom a judge had just been ordered be dishonorably discharged from the army and sentenced to 7 years in prison for raping a 14-year-old girl is stripped of his epaulets. The February 27 to March 9 trial by a mobile military court offered a rare chance of justice for rape in conflict-hit Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, where an estimated 40% of women have experienced sexual violence in some form, according to a 2010 study in the Journal of the American Medical Association. During the trial, several victims and 1 victim's father offered their testimonies in specially designed hoods that obscured their faces, an indicator of the fear of stigma that stops many from coming forward.
I don't have any more friends. Every time I find a friend, they're told that I am the reason for the colonel's arrest. I wasn't the reason. It was he who hurt me, and then he had my parents arrested.
The father of the victim at the Kamanyola trial, who spoke on condition of anonymity, said he just wanted justice for his daughter.
There is no need for compensation. I need to see this case come to an end, as the law says. I don't ask for anything. I won't negotiate.
The victim's lawyer, Armand Muhima, is pleased because he feels the proceedings have sent a message.
The goal, as I said before, is to educate the population to know that the law is there for everyone. No one is above the law, whether they are civilians or soldiers. Whether they are the perpetrators of sexual violence, justice is there to repress these behavior.
Muhima works for the Panzi Foundation, an organization set up by Nobel Prize-winning gynecologist Denis Mukwege, who campaigns to help the hundreds of women raped in eastern Congo since the region plunged into conflict in the 1990s. In 2022, 314 people in Congo, including 71 soldiers and 143 members of armed groups, were convicted of offenses relating to human rights violations and abuses such as sexual violence, according to UNJHRO, which supported 12 missions by military courts and 7 mobile courts.
Vietnamese authorities have seized 7 tons of ivory smuggled from Angola, the largest seizure of wildlife products in years. In a statement, the government said customs authorities in Haiphong City found the ivory hidden in a container declared to customs as peanuts, adding that the cargo had transited via Singapore. This followed the finding of more than 600 kilograms of African ivory last month at the city's Lac Huyen port. Trade in ivory is illegal in Vietnam, but wildlife trafficking remains widespread. Other items often found smuggled into the country include pangolin scales, rhino horns, and tiger carcasses. Last month, the court in Vietnam sentenced a man to 13 years in prison for trafficking nearly 10 tons of endangered animal parts from Africa, including ivory and rhino horns. The UN Security Council has adopted a resolution on extending the mandate of the UN peacekeeping mission in South Sudan, UNMISS, until March the 15th, 2024. The result of the vote is 13 in favor, 0 against, and 2 abstentions. Ghanaian Ambassador Harold Agiaman spoke on behalf of Gabon, Mozambique, and Ghana after the vote.
I strongly believe that UNMISS, we voted in favor of the resolution because we strongly believe that UNMISS continues to be a stabilizing factor in the brotherly country of South Sudan and remains critical in addressing the multifaceted socio-economic, political, and security challenges in South Sudan.
We acknowledge the efforts of UNMISS in enhancing stability, protecting civilians, and providing humanitarian assistance to the people of South Sudan. We urge UNMISS to continue working in close collaboration with the South Sudanese government and engage with communities to gain their trust. We recognize that the protection of civilians is of utmost importance. But on the other hand, there is a need to support the government of South Sudan in its journey to fully implement the revitalized peace agreement / roadmap. The government is committed to finding a sustained, lasting peace in South Sudan. We affirm our commitment to implementing the roadmap and appeal to the international community to support our peace-building and development efforts, particularly through technical resources to sustain our institutions as we head to elections. Excellencies, we further affirm our commitment to working constructively with UNMISS and other international partners towards the attainment of lasting peace and development in South Sudan.
Head of the United Nations Integrated Transition Assistance Mission in Sudan, UNITAM's Volker Perth says Sudanese stakeholders are closer than ever to a settlement and the return to a civilian government. He was addressing the UN Security Council on the situation in Sudan and referred to a political framework agreement that the Sudanese military and a broad range of civilian actors had just signed. Also briefing the Security Council Permanent Representative of Sudan to the United Nations, Al-Harith Idris Al-Harith Mohammed, says the transitional government is committed to ensuring the implementation of the updated matrix in line with its new timetables.
When I last briefed you on 8th of December, the Sudanese military and a broad range of civilian actors had just signed a political framework agreement. This was a watershed moment.
An update on Cyclone Freddy. Authorities in Malawi say the number of people who are still missing following the storm has risen to 427 as more countries send in humanitarian aid. Malawi's Department of Disaster Management Affairs received rapid assessment reports from 15 affected regions in the country and has put the number of displaced people at 508,244. Now the death toll has also risen to 499 with 1,332 injuries. Several countries, including the UK, Tanzania and Zambia, have sent teams to help in rescue operations. Malawi's government has set up over 500 camps across the country's southern region, where up to 10 districts have also been affected. And as search and rescue operations continue in Malawi in the aftermath of Tropical Storm Freddy, some of the country's biggest musicians have been supporting relief efforts. Musician named Bucci has been visiting temporary shelters across the southern city to deliver food and clothing donations. He also shared that some areas in southern Malawi are unreachable and people are facing severe food shortages. The music star has released a new song called One Malawi, which he says he composed to remind Malawians we are a strong, spirited nation. Bucci, along with several other musicians, is organizing a fundraising concert this week to support people displaced by the storm. And finally, news just coming in. French journalist Olivier Dubois has just arrived home to the warm embrace of family members and President Emmanuel Macron, bringing an end to almost 2 years of captivity in Mali. Mr. Dubois, who had appeared in a video last August urging authorities to do everything they could to free him from Islamist militants holding him, arrived today in a French presidency jet, the outskirts of France's capital, Paris. Mr. Dubois was the last French national held by militants in the Sahel region. French officials have not commented on the conditions of his release, but thanked Niger for its role in securing his freedom. Kidnappings are a relatively common tactic by Islamist insurgents linked to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State, which have gained ground across the Sahel region over the past decade. Those groups have repeatedly declared French citizens in West Africa to be targets since a 2013 military intervention by France drove them back a year earlier. Happy for him and, of course, the U.S. national that was also free today, and their families and the two governments. But that's it on Network Africa. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Joker Rogers.